So welcome everybody, and thank you for being with us. I'm Lynn Twist, and Bill Twist is here.
And I'm Bill Twist.
And
Thank you all for being here.
I think you're probably all Pachamama Alliance people, but just in case you're not, this is the Pachamama Alliance Monday conversation. And today we made a very important change of timing from 12, which it normally is, Pacific time to 1:30 to accommodate a change also in topic. We were going to be interviewing our wonderful co-founder, not interviewing, we'd having a conversation with John Perkins. And John has graciously allowed us to address the topic of the moment, Black Lives Matter today. And so John, and I'll say this again at the end, will be with us on June 29th, Monday, June 29th at noon Pacific time. And he's on the call right now, now being a participant. So it's great to see his face. And thank you, John, for your generosity. And John's book, Touching the Jaguar, comes out tomorrow. So look it up and know that it's a Pachamama story that you will love to know about. So thank you for joining us today, several hundred of you. And we love this community. We love these dialogues. We love these discussions. We love these calls, and we love you. And at this very, very important and epic time in the history of our country, probably the history of the entire world, we chose to have today be about Black Lives Matter. In order to accommodate that, we changed the time. So thank you for your generosity and flexibility. And we have a beautiful conversation ahead with two remarkable people. But let us begin, as always, opening sacred space, doing a meditation to arrive, to fully and completely arrive. So please lower your eyes or close them and follow your breath. And as you breathe in and out, appreciate that you can breathe, that this new awareness and slogan that's part of the times we're living in, I can't breathe, is not true for you. And as you breathe in and breathe out, breathe in the love, respect, inclusion of all the brothers and sisters in our country, in our world, as we face our history, as we face our reality, as we face ourselves. I'm going to read from Martin Luther King. Conditions continue to exist in our society which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. In the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and their status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. As long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention. And now from President George Bush. It's time for us to listen. It is time for America to examine our tragic failures. And as we do, we will also see some of our redeeming strengths. How do we end systemic racism in our society? The only way to see ourselves in a true light is to listen to the voices of so many who are hurting and grieving. Those who set out to silence those voices do not understand the meaning of America or how it becomes a better place. America's greatest challenge has long been to unite people of very different backgrounds into a single nation of justice and opportunity. The doctrine and habits of racial superiority, which once nearly split our country, still threaten our union. The answer to America's problems are found by living up to America's ideals, to the fundamental truth that all human beings are created equal and endowed by God with certain rights. We have often underestimated how radical that quest really is, and how our cherished principles and challenged systems of intended or assumed injustice. And then let's breathe together for another 5 breaths, please. And open your eyes. Okay, so I know we're all in a space and a place of deep reflection and hopefully deep listening. And today we're going to listen to some of our brothers and sisters very deeply. And I'm really delighted to turn it over to Bill to turn it over to our speakers today.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Yeah, I think this is a really pregnant time for the world and for Pachamama Alliance's work. You know, we started this series, the Resilience and Possibility series, when the COVID pandemic showed up, and we were really engaging with it like this. There's something shifting. There's going to be a possibility coming out of this. How do we make sure we come out in the right direction? And then with the Black Lives Matter and the protests coming up, this moment is just, it's electric. How much possibility is really here. And it's a time for us to really listen and think carefully about all of us individually, and certainly within Pachamama Alliance, we're looking really deeply at what's the proper response. And there's a number of people within our organization who have a lot of experience and a lot of chops in the area of racial justice and dealing with oppression. And fortunately, today we have 2 of the best. So I want to introduce you to 2 people who we're going to be hearing from. First, Mario Trigueros, who some of you know, maybe some of you don't know. Mario's been with the organization now for 6 years. He's the managing director of the organization. And what that means, among other things, what it means is the focus on the programming that we're doing, how we're transforming the educational programs we do to accomplish the mission of Pachamama Alliance, to create and bring forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet. Mario's taking responsibility for and guiding how we're developing and upgrading our programs to be as effective as possible. And Mario has a deep background in social justice, racial justice work. He went to Stanford University and studied racial studies while he was at Stanford University. He's been in the educational field even before coming to us. And so it's just a real honor to introduce you all to him and to have him with us here today. And then, and here's the most special part. It's his birthday today. So at the end, we can all wish him happy birthday. The other person who's going to be with us is Deborah Johnson, Reverend Deborah Johnson, Rev D, for those who know her. Been a board member. She's a member of the board of directors of the Pachamama Alliance, has been on the board, I think, for 11 or 12 years now. She's a minister. She's the founding minister and president of the Interlight Ministries in the Santa Cruz area. And it's an omni-faith outreach ministry dedicated to teaching the practical application of universal spiritual principles to all of life's circumstances. So she's an omni coach for the Pachamama Alliance and our board of directors, and has been just a constant guide and inspiration for us. I particularly love hearing from her because I also know there's something else about her background which appeals to me. She has a degree in economics from USC and an MBA from UCLA. So along with being an omni-faith minister, she's really grounded in the economics world, in the world of business, and brings that to all of the work that she does. She's a coach and consultant to businesses and teaches still at UCLA's business school. So I think we just have a great opportunity to listen to a really grounded perspective from two people who've been doing work in racial justice for years, and years. And I know Lynn and I are both here to listen, and I want to turn it over now and turn it over to you, Mario, and let you dig into what you want and bring Rev D in as you see appropriate too. So thank you both for being here, and let's go for it.
Let's go for it. Well, first off, welcome everybody. And thank you for rolling with the changes of schedule that happened relatively last minute. And a good chunk of you showed up. So as I feel many times with this community, thank you for showing up. So I'm going to speak to you as managing director as one of the leaders of Pachamama Alliances, with the accountability and responsibility I have for our work in the North. But I also will be speaking to you as just a man, as a father, as a person of color, as somebody grappling with what's happening right now. And I feel like I want to slow down a moment, if you would, with me. And I want to speak to, the mission. And I'm kind of speaking not as managing director here, if I can. And what the mission of Pachamama Alliance, it rolls off of my lips like a prayer almost. Environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on this planet. When I first heard that, maybe you felt it too. It spoke to something that finally, all of these things that are important can finally come together. And that tremendous responsibility and opportunity lives here in this circle and beyond. And at this moment in particular, the intersection of those three things couldn't be more relevant. And truly embodying the intersection of those three things couldn't be more relevant. I came of age in the 90s in San Francisco. I grew up in East LA and eventually moved to San Francisco. And I was sort of politicized at the time that Van Jones was a very powerful activist locally here. And a lot of the organizing that he did and that I was a part of was around police brutality. And one of the first that I distinctly remember was a young man named Idris Stelly. And he wanted to kill himself, and he knew that the police would do it for him. And so his mother called the police, telling them he was sick, and he's depressed, and he needs help. And his girlfriend called the police and said he's having a mental breakdown, and he was screaming at the police to kill me, kill me, kill me, and they did it. And it exposed how little preparation the police had to deal with mental illness, with domestic disputes, and how often they met it with brutality. And all too often, the darker your skin, the more brutal the response. And we went to City Hall, and Van stood there with hundreds of young people around him, and the Stelly family there. And he was so grounded in love. He didn't demonize anybody, not even the police. He insisted on justice for that family. He insisted on training for the police. And he brought humanity into that room and allowed every person to access their dignity. And I found my model for activism then. And not long after that, Julia Butterfly Hill, if you remember her, she climbed a redwood tree and protected this redwood grove. And, you know, to us doing this racial justice work, there was like, what? People are doing crazy stuff for the environment. They're locking themselves up to things. And, you know, she wasn't the only one that was using their bodies to stop some kind of deforestation. But this woman stayed in that tree day after day. I want to say 2 years, something close to 2 years, she was up in that tree protecting that forest. And Van began a collaboration with Julia Butterfly Hill. And Julia Butterfly Hill to us at that time was just this crazy environmentalist. Brave as hell, but who does that? But the tenacity, the courage, the persistence was at the very least admirable. And in her stand, she helped those of us who didn't have a relationship to the redwoods or to nature feel what it might be like to love something so much, to love nature so much. And when I saw that Julia Butterfly Hill and Van Jones, who represented Julia protecting these beings who didn't have a voice, who were being killed and nobody was protecting, and Van speaking for young people who didn't have a voice in a community that people had turned their backs on. If the power of those two movements could come together, I didn't even have words for it back then, but I knew it was right. And in this movement that we were in, you know, the closer you are to suffering, the easier it is to forget this thing that I suspect this circle really knows in their bones, which is that we are all one. We are all interconnected. But the closer you get to suffering, the harder it is to really embody that and love it. How could police do that? How could people treat others so badly? And so the soul work became crucial for me as an activist. And I couldn't find it in the activist community. I ended up finding it in Buddhist communities or in self-help communities or personal development communities. And my group of friends radically would shift from radical people of color on the ground doing anti-racist work to really wonderful white folks doing personal development work and environmental work. And this separation was really, really obvious, that when you're digging into the soul and healing trauma, I would find myself in white circles. When I was with people who deeply loved the earth, I tended to be with white folks. When I was with people who cared about others and justice, I was with POC, with people of color. And so I, like a lot of people out there, figured I would live with that. And when I heard the mission of the Pachamama Alliance, what it spoke to me, and I know that I'm not the only one, every person of color who I have met has said, that is the most important organization out there. And I don't mean to grandstand, but the work of integrating environmental justice, social justice, and personal fulfillment, spiritual fulfillment, that is the work of humanity today. And in one way or another, that is the work that all of us have chosen to walk. And as managing director, and this is a relatively new position, I'm really committed to translating that into programming and action that makes a significant impact in the world. I know that this moment of Black Lives Matter absolutely integrates with that mission. I have zero doubt about it. In some ways, I'm jealous we didn't come up with the policy demands. They are spot on for communities that are interdependent, that generate love and resilience. They can get us to the place that we are building toward. And what I really want to do is take a moment and to really listen and get that Black Lives Matter. It is literal. I'm going to take a guess that, like me, the only people that most of us have witnessed murdered are Black men at the hands of police. Those are the only people that I have seen killed, that I have seen truly brutalized. And the level, how many that we have seen without substantive policy changes, is a testament to the ways that we are trained to not look, to not care. We are trained to do that. And so many of us in this circle are trained to resist that, trained to unlearn that. We are committed to it. And this Black Lives Matter moment deserves pausing and really, really listening. And in that, we will absolutely find the overlap with Black Lives Matter, with the movement for Black Lives. I am nothing but exuberant excitement at the overlap and integration of that movement with the Pachamama Alliance's mission. But today and for the next few weeks, if not months, I'm really committed to listening and translating that into action. How do we do justice to this notion that Black Lives Matter? And so thank you for being here to have this conversation today. And I'm very, very honored and grateful to be talking with Deborah Johnson, Rev D. And if you've taken GCI, you've been exposed to some of Rev D's fierce love, her incredible rhetoric, and her integration, the way that she has integrated spirit and justice and environment. So Rev D, I wanted to invite you on to share what is showing up for you in this moment. How is this moment impacting you as we jump into sharing with our community? And you're muted.
Thank you, Mario, and to everybody who has come on this call. I want to invite you to take another deep breath. We're talking about things that are sometimes a little difficult to hear, and it's important that we say them. We don't have an option anymore not to say it. It's hard to say, but not saying it isn't an option. And I would like to speak directly to what is this intersection here? How does this relate to Pachamama Alliance and to the work that we have to do? And I am going to speak at this from the perspective of somebody who is African American. Obviously from my skin tone, I have a lot of mixture of different bloodlines, as do most African Americans, and also as a professional diversity trainer. And there's a pregnancy in this moment now. I think it's a ripeness, a receptivity to hear things. Whenever I do trainings and whenever I'm talking about how do we move forward, I'm always looking for what are the leverages of change. There are a lot of different theories of change, of how we do things. And one of mine is deal with it at the demand side. not just the supply side. And we have this tendency to try to heal things on the supply side. So we do a war on drugs, we do a war on poverty, we do a war on crime, we do all these wars on nouns, but we never get to the underlying something. You can do a war on drugs and try to stop the supply of drugs, but why is there such a high demand for drugs? And if we don't do something about the demand for drugs, then it doesn't matter how much we try to stop the supply, there's always going to be something that's driving that. That's part of the cry that's coming out now about the defunding police. It isn't so much about getting rid of police, but saying, why are we spending so much money criminalizing people with drug problems? And why don't we take that money and use it more towards helping people who do have drug problems and helping them become clean and sober? The Achuar people, when Lynn and Bill Twist and John Perkins first went to the Amazon, they were very clear. And they sent a message. They said, if you've come here to try to help us, that's not good enough. You need to just go home. But if you understand that our fates are interdetwined, then you need to go back and do your own healing, do your own work. Okay? What you need to do is go back and awaken from this dream. Essentially, the Achuar were saying, we're here, we're going to take care of the supply side. We're going to try to make sure that these forests don't get in the hands of the oil companies, and you can help us do that. But that's not good enough unless you are dealing with why is there such a demand to destroy the rainforest. And until you decreased the demand, then this work is going to be endless. It's a similar question that we have to ask ourselves on the social justice end, is why is there such a high demand for the social justice? And what I contend is that it is the same issues. It's the exact same issues. I coin it as footprint on the planet, footprint on the people. It is the same footprint. That whatever it is that you see in terms of extraction and exploitation of lands, there's the corollary to that of extraction in regards to people and exploitation in regards to people. And we need to come to grips with that. But even more than that, what I think this moment is particularly pregnant for is not just why is there such a high demand, but what do we think gives us the right to even have that demand in the first place? That's a spiritual question, a deeply, profoundly spiritual question about who we are and who are we to each other, and what is our relationship to the planet, what is our relationship to each other, and what gives us these rights to walk around in the world and demand what it is that we think that we want to have in our own quote unquote pursuit of happiness. All of it is built in a profound othering, not understanding the divine interconnectedness. And with this profound othering is an hierarchy, where we have created a hierarchy of existence, which has put humanity at the top of the food chain, so to speak, so that we have this dominion over the entire planet, over all of its resources, over all of the animals, and within this humanity, there's hierarchy within the humanity. So it becomes successive. So the same rights that we think that we have to have dominion over the planet and animals, that same consciousness back behind it gives us the sense that we have the right to have dominion over other people as well, and use them as though they are resources, just like a tree, that we can export them and move them here or there, just like they are some kind of an object, without understanding the underlying things with it. Take a breath. Take a breath. And so much of that sense of this divine right to be above everything else and to be above everybody else is tied up in the construct, the social construct of race. That the construct itself was developed to justify the transatlantic slave trade and to create the justification for these hierarchies and all of the systems that were going to enforce that. So I want you to just take another breath here. Just take, everybody just keep breathing. Because we really have to understand that we're not going to heal this until we heal it on the demand side. We have to ask ourselves, what is this insatiable demand that we have for the injustice? Why are we 5% of the world's population with 25% of the world's incarceration? What is that about? Why are African Americans far less than even 1% of the world's population, but over 12.5% of the world's incarcerated population? What's with this? What is this demand? What's going on? Martin Luther King called it a malady of the soul. So when I saw that knee on George Floyd's neck, my heart bled. Not just for George Floyd and how much we were not respecting his humanity, but the dehumanization of the officer himself. He was not in touch with his own humanity. And this is part of the problem that we have with these isms, is that they impact the oppressor as much as the oppressed. Robbed of our own sense of humanity, that we're doing things that's working against our own selves, killing off the planet we need to live on with this sense of the hierarchy. Now I realize that these are very difficult things to hear, but if we don't hear it, we're not going to do the work that needs to be done. It's not good enough that we simply try to elevate Black lives. That's not going to be good enough. It's just like hunting. We can try to elevate the status of the rhinoceros or the polar bear. Polar bears' lives matter. Yes, they do. But we can't keep going through every single species trying to convince you that their lives matter. We have to question, why are they being hunted in the first place? What's going on with that? What gives us the right to think that we can just go out and kill people? And as sure as I am sitting here, Black people and African American males in particular might as well be on the endangered species list, where there is a license that's out now to hunt and to kill them. That's what I saw with George Floyd. It wasn't just police brutality. I saw this 5'9", 155-pound white male take down this 6'6", 245-pound Black man as though he was out on the hunt. We have these two issues here, and I know this is hard to hear, but here, the underlying thing that I'm saying is that there's a malady of the soul that has to be healed. And why we fund, why we give permission for this to continue in the name of protecting the rest of us. It's our complicity. It's our enabling. It's our unwillingness to take a look at what is this stuff that needs to be healed that's going to perpetuate it. Yes, we need to pay attention to Black lives, and they need to matter. Not just against police brutality, but housing, employment, food, education, healthcare, all of these things But when I see the people marching in the street, I hear them saying Black Lives Matter. But what I also really hear them saying is that they know that the time of white supremacy has to end, that it's over. And I'm reminded of something that Martin Luther King Jr. said. He said, the days of racial segregation are over. We can be certain of that. The only thing uncertain of it is how costly the segregationists will make the funeral. And we're in a similar situation here. The days of racial supremacy are over. The only thing uncertain is how costly will the supremacists make the funeral. Mm-hmm. It's our job to hospice this away right now and birth the world that can work for everyone.
Hospicing is exactly the word that came to me as you were talking about. Hospicing the death of a system that separates, that's based on scarcity, and midwifing. That's the other part that the Pachamama Alliance and this community is so powerful. Midwifing a vision of an interconnected world, of a regenerative economy, regenerative communities. I want to ask you something because, I'll tell you something that I resonate deeply with everything that you said. And I've got this nuance right now that is really coming to me. There's a spiritual journey to this, a spiritual question. And in some ways, looking at it from the spiritual perspective gives us the capacity to address the policy level. Because, you sort of spoke to this thing of the spiritual paradigm right now provides a license to kill for police. That license is policy. That license are laws and structures and whatnot that allow certain things. To what extent are you seeing the need for policy action? With how do those two things live? I mean, there's too often when we focus on the spiritual work that is absolutely core, we can slip into that, well, if we're all one, doesn't that make this whole race thing obsolete? And shouldn't we not be paying too much attention? Shouldn't we be working toward a post-racial society? Where does the policy and the work it takes to generate new policy fit into that spiritual journey?
Well, yes, I think we should all work towards a post-racial society. We're just not there now. And that's the difficulty, is when we're blind and want to say that we're there now. If I were to talk about us as an organization, and that's just part of what I love so much about the Pachamama Alliance, is that we're not afraid to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work. The work that we've been doing in the South, the work that we've been doing in Ecuador is extreme social justice work. We've had to work at the policy level. We've had to work not just for the rights of the planet, but for the rights of the indigenous people themselves. We've had to partner. We've had to invest, we've had to empower, and we've had to follow their leadership. We've had to learn how to understand their wisdom and have them at the table helping to create the policy. This is not something where white people from the outside have got to figure this out exclusively. Now is the time to listen. Now is the time to partner. Now is the time to heal. And because racism has these two components, one is the attitudinal, the prejudice, the bias, but what really makes it the ism is the structural systemic changes. And just being nice is not going to end the structural change. It happened brick by brick, policy by policy, that has to be reversed. Brick by brick, policy by policy.
I don't know how much you've dove into the Movement for Black Lives website, but for everybody on this call, I highly encourage you to do it. That brick by brick policy is, I mean, it's astounding what they've put together. They've got policy briefs, they've got bullet points of what each policy demand means. For everybody on this call, I invite you to go through the exercise of reading it, steeped in Black lives, steeped in the literal words of what the policy demands are. Get them in your bones, entertain their possibilities, figure out, and I don't mean this in a preachy way. I'm saying this as my own form of allyship, to really explore what's your role to play in that. And once you've done that, change the words from Black lives to people, and you will find it's beautiful. As you alluded to, we're talking education, we're talking vibrant communities. They're really incredible at building resilient and regenerative communities. That is what these policy demands, that's what they articulate. So I did this exercise of reading them for literally, and they are they're almost poetic and incredible work. And then come back and you'll see that we could easily adopt these as policy demands, and we would have a vibrant world because of it.
I also want to encourage everybody to go on a journey that the Pachamama organization is going on. There's a book called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And it's been about a year now that as a board and as a staff, we've been on a journey with that book and having groups and discussions and trainings and engagements. It's a game changer. I've been a diversity trainer over 40 years professionally, and before that as a teenager and a college student. I have never seen anything that has been quite as effectual as this book. It is written by a white woman for white women. I mean, for white people, and to have discussions about what does all this mean about this construct of whiteness itself. Because it's one thing to just try to focus on Black Lives Matter. That's good, but if it's to the exclusion of really deconstructing this thing called race and dismantling the racism, then it's kind of like the Achuar people saying, don't just come over here and try to help us with the rainforest. You need to go home. You need to check your own values. You need to take a look at your demand to cause havoc over here. And this is the same kind of work that we have to do when it comes to people that we've been doing in regards to the planet. We already have the soul's propensity to move in this direction, and we just need to keep it up. White Fragility, we're on that journey. We're going to be launching it more and more throughout the organization. I highly encourage you to read it.
We're going to be doing a lot more work in this domain that a lot of you will be hearing about over the coming weeks. If you are in GCI right now, in particular, but there will be more on that. I'm reminded something that Van said in 2007 to a group of facilitators that was basically, it's almost impossible for white folks to really hear the pain from people of color. And this moment is filled with that. This moment is filled with that anguish, that it's almost impossible to stomach how intense it is. And that the few who can are those with a spiritual practice. That there's almost no way you can actually hold the suffering, the heartache, without a contemplative practice of some kind. And so, you know, when I go to my meditation retreats and I go to therapy, it's to make myself feel comfortable, sure. It's also for the service of justice and liberation for everybody. And it's one thing that I know in this community in particular, its propensity, its capacity for spirit, for that universality. What I would say is, you know, for me, the rainforest, when I went to the rainforest, I feel like I found my third parent, this trustworthy spiritual guidance that's always there for me. Feel like this Pachamama Alliance community has that spiritual grounding, and that spiritual grounding uniquely provides the capacity to be anti-racist allies. It gives you the grounding to hold the contradiction that perpetrators are victims of white supremacy too. They are also dehumanized. They deserve liberation as much as people of color do. To hold those contradictions, to work for liberation and not be crushed by the suffering that white supremacy creates is something unique that the Pachamama Alliance community, I think, can really, really offer this moment.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. You know, I concur with that. And I want you to hear that when we say like Black Lives Matter, we're not just saying Black Lives Matter. It's Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
And historically in this country, they have not,
Yes.
in a way that is very, very unique.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be teaching about this extensively day after tomorrow in these sessions that I have going on about how it is that we create sacred race relationships. I have a primer going on. Take another breath. Just take another breath. What is at stake here are not civil rights or even just equality under the law. What is at stake here is humanity. That literally, when the construct of race was created, not only did it put white at the top of the food chain, it put Black as subhuman, so that we have laws on the books from the very beginning, from slavery to the Supreme Court even saying in the Dred Scott decision that it was, and a 7-2 decision, that it was never the intention of the founders to ever have anybody of African descent be a citizen. This was in 1855, that the founders would have never done anything that irresponsible. I mean, I can go on, and it's to say that what is at stake here now is actual humanity and the affirmation of humanity. And for those who are living under the construct of whiteness, the power sharing that's being asked now at a more fundamental level is actually even share the humanity. That when you see flesh color, it's like, what color is that? Or when people say, well, I don't have a race, I'm just human. And this way where being of the white race gives the categorically, we're the human. Like, we're just the ones that are human. This being able to be treated like an individual. Take a breath, because we're witnessing it now within the police system in the way that it's happening. That is not what people of color experience, particularly Black people. We are not treated as individuals. We are not. We are seen as a group. We are treated like roaches and rodents. Take a breath. That when you see a little ant in the house, there's no real panic. you know they're going after something and you're going to be able to follow their trail. When you see a roach, oh my God. And it isn't so much that roach as you're worried about his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, his nephews, his nieces, that, oh, they must be up in these cupboards here somewhere. They're going to take over. When you set the mouse trap and you get a mouse and people rejoice, I got him, I got him. That mouse might have not have been the one who bit through your whatever, but it doesn't matter. I got one. I got one. And it's this kind of wholesale, generic inability to make the distinctions, being treated as this one kind of en masse thing that we never really ended slavery. We didn't. The 13th Amendment says you can't have involuntary servitude for anything except criminal activity. So slavery immediately became the penal justice system, and it has continued on. Slave labor in the prisons and the policing is the pipeline into this. But it's impacting everybody. I'm glad that Whole Foods just a couple of years ago stopped using prison labor to make their cheeses. But it's so endemic and systemic everywhere. This isn't just about Black lives and Black people dying in the street. It's about everybody else. And how do we hold ourselves, and what kind of power are we wielding, and where is our money going? And are we living in such a way as to have this interdependence? This is a spiritual crisis that we're in. This isn't just a civil rights issue, that civil rights don't create the equality. Civil rights are an affirmation of the pre-existing equality. And that's what we're needing to establish now. Really, 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 this equality means not only are these people low, subhuman, the rest of us are not superhuman. The leveling the playing field means leveling both of those in a way that's clear and articulate, and it's not going to happen if we turn the blind eye.
I'm going to use your line. Everybody take a breath. I like this line. Everybody feel your bodies. I'm being literal too. Give it a little scan. Notice what your body feels like right now. For a lot of us, our bodies kind of respond before our minds even can. It's really let it soak in. So one of the things I want to say is that, you know, Rev D talked about that we're hospicing this story. And as you know, we dive into this, as I dive into this, and as Pachamama Alliance, the staff here starts really grappling with this, increasingly we are seeing, confidently feeling the intersection of all of the crises that we're facing. And this is, on one hand, a unique time. You've got unprecedented inequality. You've got a global pandemic. Let's not forget we are in the midst of a climate crisis. You've got rebellions across the world that are focusing on ending and reversing racism. These aren't random explosions of energy. These are all symptoms of a system that's failing, a system that's grounded in separation and that is fundamentally exploitative and unsustainable. So the good news about that is that there's this toolkit of spiritual work and policy work is the answer. The challenge is that it's broad and that we will be uniquely called on to to use our spiritual energy, our spiritual grounding for the purposes of creating a sustainable and just future. And this isn't empty rhetoric. When you become overwhelmed, and if you're not overwhelmed, you might want to get your fever checked or your temperature checked. If you have a pulse, it's almost impossible not to be shaken by the news. I really invite you to call what higher purpose serves you. And for some of you, that might be liberation movements and freedom fighters of the past. It might be the rainforest. It might be a religion. Whatever it is, those forces are going to be key to really provide the resilience for us to move forward. And I wanted to remind you, if you didn't already know, we're going to be diving into a sort of phase 2 of this conversation next week, next Monday. And there will be more interaction. But before we head, I want to bring back Bill and Lynn. Josh, are we going to open? I'm going to actually pose a question, if you wouldn't mind. And some of you are already sharing, but anything that you'd like to share that moves you from today, go ahead and share it and move doesn't just mean positive. You're more than welcome to say, yeah, but this is a dialogue. We will dialogue far more. This is a journey, is what I really mean. This is a journey that we'll have to be authentic with. Great. Wonderful. Well, in a moment, I want to bring back Bill and Lynn. Rev D, do you want to say anything else in closing?
Just don't lose hope.
Mm-hmm.
In the midst of all of this, I use it as an acronym: keep your heart open, stay in possibility consciousness, and keep engaged. This is such a beautiful moment, a moment like no other moment that we've ever experienced in history. Let's come together, so stay woke, like we say in the Black community, and really, really move that dial.
Thank you, Rev D. Thank you, Mario. Brilliant, beautiful, deep, provocative, courageous. It's like a rebirth. So I just want to remind you all that this will continue next week on the 22nd. We'll probably bring in some other voices, but Mario and Rev D will be back to continue this conversation. So bring everybody you know. And then on the 29th, we'll have John back with us to hear about his book, Touching the Jaguar, but really about his wonderful work to change perception, which is very, very related to where we are now in our country and in our world. And finally, I want to say the Pachamama Alliance community this is part of this possibility and resilience series, and we didn't know how resilient we were going to need to be. We didn't know how much possibility we're going to need to stay centered in. We didn't realize when we named this series, Possibility and Resilience, what was going to show up. We thought it already had, the pandemic. But as Mario reminded us, we're in a climate crisis, a pandemic and health crisis, an economic crisis, a crisis in our democracy, and a racial crisis. And there's probably 10 more crises that I'm not even naming that might come. So stay resilient, stay in possibility, stay the course. Pachamama Alliance is a taproot place for us to work together. We're really in this together. And I bow to you, Mario, for your leadership, for your courage, for your life story and your birthday. And bow to you, Rev D, for your leadership in Pachamama Alliance, in your church, in your community, in the world. And we love you both, and God bless you and thank you, and see you all next week.
Yeah, and I just want to say I love the lesson we learned from Rev D. Take a breath. It's such a great. Take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath.
That's served very well in
Yes.
times and long times too. So thank you both, Rev D and Mario, for just bringing your hearts and wisdom and sharing it with everybody. Can't wait till next week too. Great.
I wanted to say one quick thing in closing, that
Yeah.
all these crises, Lynn, that you just mentioned, they are not separate and distinct. They are all symptoms of this same crisis.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They are all symptoms of what happens when you don't understand your interconnectedness and the sacredness of all beings.
Mm. Wow. Thank you.
Much love to all of you.
Bye,
Thank you, Rev D, as
Thank you.
always.
All right.
All right, folks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Goodbye.
everybody. Thank you.